What's going on, y'all? My name is Alexander. Thank you for being here and welcome to a first look at the Patreon exclusive design room, the place where I take y'all behind the scenes and teach you the design process that goes into the garments that you can sew along with me at home. For example, we can take lovely designer garments like these Loewe trousers here and we can recreate them just from reference images, learning as we go and then sewing them together. But before we can start breaking down designer garments to learn and even creating our own beautiful designs, we need to have a solid foundation, and that's where today's video comes in. I'm going to be teaching y'all how to draft a trouser block, specifically a slim trouser block with no darts in the front but a couple darts in the back. Alright, so I've got my computer here today. I'm going to be drafting on Clo3D. If you don't have access to Clo3D or prefer standard 2D pattern drafting, you can do that as well. You can follow along everything I do here with paper, a ruler, hopefully some curved rulers, and a mechanical pencil. Now, as we get to drafting, any of y'all that are familiar with the Mueller & Sohn pattern making system, you're probably going to see some common things. I really love the Mueller & Sohn metric pattern drafting system, and their blocks are incredible. I've tailored their system a bit with aspects from other pattern making systems, but the majority, the core of my pattern making experience comes from them. If you'd like some supplemental reading, I highly encourage that you purchase their textbooks. They're super helpful, albeit dense, they don't hold your hand, and there's some issues with translation, but you've got me here walking you through it step by step. Because a lot of my drafting and grading process is highly influenced by the Mueller & Sohn metric pattern making system, I am going to be using centimeters as I draft. I would encourage you to try it out if you've never used centimeters before. I live in America, but I still found it very helpful, but I will be adding conversions as we go along. So if you'd rather use inches, you can do so. But again, especially when we get into grading, which I will be showing y'all how to grade patterns, it is a lot easier to break centimeters into millimeters as opposed to breaking fractions of an inch into even smaller fractions of an inch. But anyways, the last thing I have before we actually get into the drafting process, and this is important, there's a lot of formulas involved in the Mueller & Sohn metric pattern making system. It doesn't necessarily take into account all of your body measurements. Rather, it takes into account specific body measurements and uses proportions from those body measurements to fill out the rest of the pattern. It's really helpful if you're using a standard size chart like myself, where you're drafting sewing patterns for a wide range of audiences. And it's also going to be useful to you if you'd like to do the same or even create your own clothing brand. So if that's something you'd be interested in, this again is going to help you out a lot. And because there's a lot of formulas involved, I've created a little chart here. What's really nice about this, and you can download this from Patreon, which is linked in the bio. You do not have to become a paid member. It's available for free. All you have to do is join as a member. You don't have to pay a dime and you can get this. What you're gonna do is simply input your measurements in the green section here. I have it set up in inches and centimeters, and then you're also going to select your ease range from the chart on the side, and it's gonna do all the calculations for you in output here in orange. I'm just gonna import a size here, not necessarily from my size chart, but just something we can work off of, and then you'll see the magic of this document here. So for the waistband girth, that's gonna be your waist girth plus an inch or plus around 2.5 centimeters. So let's say we're gonna go 89 for this. Hip girth, we're gonna leave at 102, I like that. For the hem width, this is gonna be the total circumference of the hem, not necessarily if you lay your pants flat and measured it across. I do like 40 centimeters. If you're anywhere between like a 32, 34, and you want like a skinnier leg, more tapered leg, 40 centimeters is a great starting point. And then for the side length, let's say 105. Inseam, 80, we're gonna say, let's just call it 80. That's gonna be close to a 32-inch inseam. And boom, we're already starting to see calculations. For our ease, I like negative ease on the front hip. So we're gonna do negative 0.5 centimeters. It's gonna be about negative 1/8 of an inch. For the total crotch width, this is gonna be like the distance between the two crotch curves. I'm gonna split that right down the middle. I like negative 3.5. And then for the back trouser width, this is gonna be like our back hip area. I'm gonna, again, split this down the middle. I like 3 centimeters for that. And so again, you can do the same thing down here with inches if you prefer to draft in inches. And then it's gonna output in orange. You don't need to adjust these at all. All right, So now let's get into the fun part. We're actually going to start drafting a very well-balanced trouser pattern. Now, if you're following along with me in Clo 3D, we're just going to make a large rectangle here and we're going to fill it with internal lines. If you're following along with paper at home, you're going to use your paper here, and then we're just going to be drawing lines using a ruler, an L square, and again, maybe some curved rulers if you have them, okay? By the way, as we move along, we're going to be drafting the back leg over the front leg. If you're using paper at home, you're going to trace that because it gets a little bit messy. In Clo 3D, I'm actually just going to shift the internal lines over each other. Because I'm going to do that, I want my paper to be a little bit wider, and then I'm going to create a vertical line that's not on the edge of the pattern, but it's going to be offset by a little bit. So I'm going to offset this by 20 centimeters. That's a little over 10 inches. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start by marking our knee height. And again, you can use your chart here. Go down to knee height. It's going to be orange in the output do not edit column. So mine is 46 centimeters. What you would do at home is just measure up 46 centimeters. I'm going to offset as an internal line and just type in 46 centimeters. Perfect. We've got my knee line. We're then going to mark the inseam. So we're going to measure up from the bottom of the paper. Our inseam, that inseam is 80. And when you're measuring your inseam, you're measuring up to the crotch. I like to leave just a tad bit of room. I always add more room in the crotch once I start working with the sloper, but I want just a tad bit of room built into the sloper in general. We're not making a moulage that needs to like stick on the body, so I like to give just a little bit of room. So I've got 80 centimeters for the inseam. Now we're gonna plot our side length. So again, I'm gonna offset as an internal line and just mark 105 centimeters. Perfect. Okay, let's go in and we're gonna name this. So we're gonna say waist. Actually, we'll call this crotch. And then we're gonna call this the knee height. Perfect. And we're just gonna leave this just like that. Now look at your document and you're gonna see under the measurement column here, you're gonna see hip line. For me, based on the calculation in the worksheet here, it is gonna be 8.1 centimeters. Perfect. Now in Clo 3D, you don't need to do this if you're working with paper and pencil, but in Clo 3D, I'm gonna add a point to the intersection of all these lines. That way I can break these up. So we need to move out from the right of our line here, this vertical line. On the hip line, we need to go out the front trouser width. The front trouser width and the front crotch width. That's effectively your 1/4 hip circumference, but we're taking a little bit of negative ease away because we want to shift that extra excess to the back leg. So I'm gonna measure out to the right, the front trouser width. And so you'll have that in your document here. And then once I've plotted that point, I'm gonna create a line and I'm gonna measure up to the waist and I'm gonna measure down to the crotch. In Clo 3D, I'm just gonna measure up to one of them and I'm gonna mirror that creation. And then I'm gonna select the one that goes a little too far and I'm gonna extend and trim it to the internal line. And I'm gonna add a point as well because I wanna break this segment up here. All right, and so now I have my front trouser width plotted here. I'm gonna measure out along the hip line to the right. I'm gonna measure out the front trouser crotch width. I don't need to extend a line up and down. I am just gonna make a small tick mark here. That way I know, because sometimes those little dots can be a little bit hard to see. So we have a small tick mark here, and that is technically where my crotch is going to sit, but that is not my crotch point. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Now we're gonna measure backwards this total front here. So for me, it's 31.1, and we need to divide 31.1 by 2. and that's 15.55. I'm just gonna measure out from the side seam 15.6. So I'm measuring from that vertical line that we drew. I'm gonna measure out to the right half of the total width. And this is gonna be my crease line. So this is effectively like the midline of my pattern. And so I'm gonna establish that crease line. So I need to measure up and down from that point. If you're using Clo3D, you can hold shift and measure up and mirror it and make sure that it stays straight. If you're working from home, I would add tick marks along these lines to make sure that you keep a straight alignment as you go down, okay? I'm gonna pull this down just a bit, and then I'm gonna select this bottom point, and I need to extend slash trim, and add a point to the pattern outline, because I need this to come all the way down. So now I've created a segment point, and I've split these up. Now that we've done that, we need to establish our hem. So you're gonna take whatever your hem width was. In my case, I'm using 40 centimeters. We're gonna divide that into quarters, so that's gonna be 10 centimeters. And we're gonna subtract 1 centimeter. If you're using inches, 3/8 of an inch is gonna be something that's comparable there, okay? So I'm gonna measure out from that crease line that we've created. I'm gonna measure out 9 centimeters on both sides. And you know what, before I forget, let's go ahead and name this. We're gonna say crease line. If you find it useful, try to annotate on your pattern as you go. That way you understand what the different parts are. So now we've measured out a quarter of our hem width minus 1 centimeter on each side, or again, minus around 3/8 of an inch. Now I need to go half of a centimeter in and make a segment point. So that's gonna be about 1/8 of an inch. It's a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. Okay, now from the point that we made that's half an inch in from the outside of the hem, we're gonna draw a guideline. The front guideline, by where the inseam is gonna go all the way up to the point from the front trouser crotch width on the hip line. So we're gonna measure it out here, okay? And then before we can draw the outseam guideline, we need to bisect or split in half the line in between the hip and the crotch. So mine is 8.1. On Clo3D, what I'm gonna do is select, I'm gonna press X, which is my add point slash split line tool. I'm gonna right click in there, and then I'm just gonna uniform split it into 2 equal segments. Then I'm gonna grab my internal line tool by clicking on G. I'm gonna select that point that's half a centimeter in, and then I'm just gonna draw all the way up and double click to end that there. All right. Now what I'm going to do is on this line here, our crotch line, where we plotted our inseam length, we need to find out where this intersects. So I'm going to right click on that line, and I'm gonna add a point to the intersection. Now that I have that point marked, I'm going to click A, which is gonna allow me to select the entire line. I'm gonna right click on it, and I'm gonna convert this to a baseline. The equivalent to this is drawing lightly with your pencil, because we don't want too many deep marks. We wanna be able to keep this clean. I need this to be visible, but not distracting. Okay, now on the out seam or the side seam here, I'm gonna do something similar here, but I wanna find where this guideline is intersecting our knee line. So I'm gonna add a point here. And I can see 12.39. Now, we wanna shift this in 1 centimeter. I don't want 11.39 as my knee width, so I'm just gonna say 11.5. So I'm splitting the line. I'm gonna click in here, and then I want my yellow line, which is closer to the midpoint of the knee. I'm gonna say 11.5, and that's gonna create a segment point out here. Now that I've created that segment point, I'm gonna take this line and I'm gonna convert this to a baseline. We're gonna clean this up just a little bit. I'm also gonna remove this point because I don't need it right now. So we've established our knee width here. We didn't use any formulas for that. We simply drew this line, and this is going to, again, give us a very structured drape. It's gonna give us a very balanced pattern. So I've got 1.5 here. I need to shift this over to the front as well. So I'm gonna split line. 11.5. Make sure you're splitting on the right side here. And so now I have 2 equal sides. Okay, we're now going to actually start drafting the inseam and the outseam. When I draft my inseam and an outseam, I like to go up from the hem straight about 1 inch. So that's about 2.54 centimeters. We're gonna call it 2.5. This is just going to help me create a clean hem when I go to sew it. If both sides of the hem meet at a 90-degree angle at the bottom, it's very easy to sew them together. So we're just gonna go like that. And then I'm gonna click on G and create an internal line, or you're gonna use your ruler and you're gonna draw a line from these points. We're gonna connect a point at our knee, and then we're gonna connect a point here at the crotch. And we'll leave it like that for now. You might wanna draw this lightly because we are gonna change this again if you're following along with paper and pencil at home. And then we're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna go up to the knee, and then we're gonna go up to the hip. And we're just gonna leave it like that. All right, so we're starting to see the leg come together. We've got a few things we need to tweak before finishing up here. On our waist, we're not using a dart, so we need to shift our front waist point in just a little bit for some shaping purposes. So we're gonna go 1.5 centimeters. That's about 5/8 of an inch, a little bit less than 5/8 of an inch. And then I'm gonna take my internal line tool by clicking G, and I'm gonna create a point. It needs to go through this point here. So this is our front trouser width. We need to go through where that front trouser width ends and where the front trouser crotch width begins. And we need to draw all the way down, but it needs to go through that point. So if you're using a ruler, start here, make sure the ruler passes through here, and we're just gonna draw down to our crotch line. If you're using Clo 3D, select this segment point, right click, and let's say like 20 centimeters. We'll go 25, there we go. That's gonna get us close enough. And then we just wanna make sure we end it there. And now we need to grab this point here and extend/trim and add point to the internal line. So now it's broken this internal line into 2 segments, and I can see here we've got 4.74 centimeters. So we're gonna do 4.74. We need to divide this by 2, 2.37. So we're gonna call it 2.4 centimeters. Now on this vertical guideline that we drew, we're gonna measure up half of that. Again, so we calculated the distance of the new line here. We divided by 2, and we're gonna measure up by that distance. We're now gonna take either your ruler or your internal line, and you're gonna draw a line from your crotch point to that line. All right. So now we're starting to build where the crotch curve is gonna go. I'm gonna select all of these lines. I'm gonna convert them to a baseline just to kind of clean some things up here. Now, I'm gonna take my internal line tool. I'm gonna select this crotch point. I'm gonna create a segment point here, and I'm gonna measure all the way up to my waist, and I'm gonna create another segment point. So basically I've just copied that line, but now I have a clean line to work with, and I can follow these baselines. So I'm gonna click Z to get my edit segment tool open, and I'm gonna click and drag over this, and then I'm going to right click, and I'm gonna say join these overlapping points. That's gonna turn this entire thing into a continuous line. Once I've done that, I'm gonna click V, which is my edit curve point tool, and I'm gonna start adding some curve points. If you're doing this with paper and pencil, here's where you're gonna want a curved ruler, and we just wanna follow this curve as best as we can. Now, notice how it's giving me different degrees here where these 2 lines meet. That's because it's part of a continuous line. Technically, to get it perfect, we want this to be 180 degrees. Clo 3D is one of those things where you can get stuck over analyzing things, and it can halt your progress. You don't need it to get exactly 180 degrees. When I get down to this crotch point, I do want it to, at the end, taper into that blue baseline that we've created here, okay? So that is gonna be the slope of my crotch curve. and I'm gonna leave it just like that. Beautiful. All right, we're really starting to see things take shape here. Now, on the side seam side of the waist, we can go in between 1 and 1.5 centimeters. I like to take this in about 1 centimeter. We need to go up 0.7 centimeters, so I'm gonna grab my internal line, I'm holding shift, I'm gonna right click and say 0.7. That is close to 1/4 of an inch, okay? So now I'm gonna take my internal line tool, I'm gonna click on this point here, and I'm gonna go over to my center front waist, and I'm gonna click again. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna join my overlapping points here, and then I'm gonna convert this little guideline here to a baseline just to clean some things up. And then I'm gonna take my internal line tool, create a segment point here, and I'm gonna match it up with my side seam at the waist, okay? Again, I'm gonna do the same thing. I need to join these overlapping points because it's gonna give me an idea of the slope of my side seam here, okay? All right, now to make this a little bit easier to read, I am going to select these lines and I'm gonna convert these to baselines just to clean this up just a little bit. All right, it's a little bit easier to see. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a segment point and I'm gonna pull this down. Ultimately, I wanna get my center front as close to 90 degrees as I can, and we can tweak this later on, but for now, let's just get it as close as possible, and I am going to increase this just a bit, not by too much, but I do like to use like a 7-inch zipper when I'm drafting trousers and jeans, especially ones that are gonna be mid to high waist. So around 17.5 centimeters is pretty decent for that. That's also gonna help me get more of a 90-degree curve without scooping too much here. I like how my line is almost matching up right with where I extended my crease line all the way up to the top there, okay? All right, now I'm gonna select V again so I can grab my edit curve point tool. I'm gonna add a curve point about 1/3 of the way down, and then I'm gonna drag this out. I want the bottom of my internal line to meet up just along that baseline if possible. I don't want to add too much curve. I like to have a straighter side seam. I think it gives it a more structured and designer looking drape. Now I'm going to add another curve point here, and I'm going to pull this up. Again, I don't need to hit 180 degrees. If I go and pull this out to 180, you can even see, I mean, it just looks strange. It doesn't look good. So we're going to pull this down. And you'll see when we add seam allowance later, if you don't hit 180 degrees, it still smooths that out. You won't even notice the difference. So 178, I want this in just a little bit more. I'm gonna zoom in here, I'm gonna hold shift and just pull this about, let's do 0.1, 10 millimeters. That's better. Now I'm gonna go down here to about 1/3 of what this line length would be between my knee and my hip. I'm gonna add another segment point and I'm just gonna shift this inwards. Let's say around 40 mil. Okay, now we need to add a little bit of shaping to the inseam, nothing crazy. I'm gonna go about, if you split this into thirds, I'm gonna add a segment point at the third that's nearest the top. And then I'm gonna pull this out, let's say about 30 mil. And I like that. Okay, so I'm gonna join the overlapping points here at the hem. I'm gonna leave these as is. This might look like it's a little bit janky, and at home you can smooth this curve if you're using paper and pencil. I'm gonna leave this like this, because again, once I add seam allowance, you'll see that this little point here, it really smooths out. You don't even notice it. So here we go. We have our front trouser leg. Before I do anything with the back leg, I'm gonna take the trace tool. I'm gonna select all the outer edges of the pattern. Up here at the waist, down here at the side seam. I'm gonna keep following it down, and I'm holding shift as I click to make sure I keep all of these selected. And then I also need to grab the actual pattern edge down here at the bottom. And now I've got everything selected here, and I'm gonna right click and trace it as a pattern. At this point, if you're using paper and pencil, you might wanna use a tracing wheel and trace this out, or put lighter paper on top and trace that out. So that way you have a clean front pattern to work with here, okay? I'm gonna get rid of some of these extended lines. We don't need these. So I'm just gonna clean this up, and then I'll see y'all in just a second to start working on the back leg. All right, we've got the front leg cleaned up, so now we're gonna start working on the back leg. We're gonna draft the back leg directly over the top of the front. To do this, we're gonna start with the side seam and the inseam from the hem up to the knee, and we're gonna stop right there, okay? In Clo 3D, what I like to do is select a line, click Command C, and then Command V, and then hold Shift and make sure it's only going out horizontally, okay? Now we're gonna right click, and we're gonna do 2 centimeters. Now remember, we shifted our front in 1 centimeter, so in order to grow it proportionally, we gotta go out 2 centimeters for the back. Same thing with the side seam, holding Shift, making sure it's not going diagonally, but just horizontally. We're gonna go out 2 centimeters. All right, so now I have a perfect shift. It's literally a carbon copy of my inseam and outseam up to the knee. Now that we have that done, I'm gonna select the entire pattern piece of the front leg, and I'm gonna convert it to a baseline just to make it, again, easier to read as we go along. I'm also gonna take my hip, and I wanna convert that to a baseline. So this crease line here, this determines the middle of the pants. On the back of the trousers, the middle is gonna be shifted just a little bit. Now ultimately our crease line, or the grain line, is gonna remain the same, but there's a lot more volume in the back, so we're gonna be moving some things around to accommodate that volume. So we need to go out between 1 and 1.5 centimeters. I'm gonna split it and say 1.2 centimeters. Everything that we're doing here is effectively determining the slope of the center back seam. The more you go out, the less vertical the center back seam is going to be. So if you have a lot of volume in the back, if you have a bigger butt, you want to go a little bit wider with that. So from this shifted middle part of the center back, we're going to measure out the total back trouser width divided in 2 each ways, okay? So if you go over to your measurements here, the total back trouser width from our calculations is 44.4, divided in 2 is 22.2. So with my internal lines tool selected, I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna start measuring in either direction. I'm gonna click 22.2, and then I'm gonna select mirror creation and click return or enter. And so now I have 22.2 evenly distributed on both sides from that center point here, okay? Perfect. So you can see 22.2, 22.2. Now this part is where our back crotch is gonna go, kind of like how we had the front crotch drafted on the hip, and then we used our guideline here. So I need to measure back from this outer edge here. We need to measure back the back trouser crotch width. So from the calculations with my measurements, that is going to be 15.9. And I'm gonna make a little tick mark here. Nothing crazy. We'll just do 0.5 centimeter. All right, now we're starting to get somewhere. But we need to establish where our center back seam is going to go and the slope of that center back seam. To do so, we're gonna measure along the side seam on the front leg. Now it doesn't need to be perfectly accurate with the curve. We're gonna go up between 2 and 3 centimeters. Again, the more you add, the more curvature in your center back seam. The less you add, the straighter your center back seam, the straight up and down your center back seam is gonna be. So I'm gonna go up, we'll say 2.5. So I'm gonna use my internal line tool and just start drawing up, right click and say 2.5. All right, now using a ruler or internal line on Clo 3D, we're gonna click the top of this segment and we're gonna create a line that goes all the way to where our back trouser width, or back trouser crotch width ended here, okay? That's why I did a little tick mark to make it easier to see for us, all right? And I can actually convert this to a baseline now. We don't need this. Now, if you're doing this by hand, I really recommend having an L square for this part. If you're using Clo 3D, it makes it really easy to add a perpendicular line, but basically we need to take a line that's perpendicular from this slope. So I'm gonna right click on it, add perpendicular internal line, and I'm gonna set it to local. So it's working off of this line here. You can see the black is the line that it's working off of, the red is the new internal line, and it's going down. I don't want that, so we're gonna reverse. Now it's shooting up towards the top. Perfect. This is not your final center back seam, and this is something that really confused me when I started working with the Mueller & Son metric pattern making system. So just consider this as a guideline and nothing else for now. We're gonna leave this and we're gonna start working on the side seam now. What we need to do is we need to go from the knee up to the hip point, but we need to extend that the exact amount of the side seam on your front pattern. If you're drafting this by hand, preferably you'd use a curved ruler or one like this here, but in Clo 3D, I can just select this and I see from the knee up to the waistline here, that's 59.97 centimeters. And I'm just gonna call it 60. But what we need to do is we need to cross through our back hip point. So that 22.22 that we measured towards the left, we need to hit that specific point. So create a segment, end it here, and then we're just gonna say, I'm gonna call it 60. Keep it close. Okay, now this is gonna be just another guideline here. It's not the final out seam or side seam. For our inseam, what we're gonna do is measure the front inseam, so that's 34.18 for me. We're gonna go up from here, again, creating an internal line. I'm gonna right click on the back trouser I'm gonna right click on the back trouser crotch width endpoint. Jesus, say that 5 times fast. And now for my line length, that needs to be this measurement, 34.18 minus 0.7 centimeters. So you're gonna basically subtract 5/8 inch from your inseam. All right, so we're gonna say 33.5. And so this is where our inseam, this is where our crotch point on the back leg is gonna go. Your back inseam should be a little bit shorter and we're gonna add more curvature to it. This is pretty standard and it makes it easier to sew the final product. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take a ruler, or in Clo 3D, I like to use just an internal line. We're gonna measure from the midpoint, so where that crease line is on the knee, we're gonna measure all the way up to the side seam here, where it would meet at the waist, and that is 63.77 centimeters. In order to find where my waist guideline should meet, we need to measure up here along our guideline for the center back. We're gonna measure 63.77, or whatever this measurement is, plus 1 centimeter, or plus 3/8 of an inch. So I'm looking for 64.77. You can eyeball this. You can also, if you wanna be really specific with it, I'm gonna grab a base ellipse tool. I'm gonna select right there in the knee point. I'm gonna go to radius and I'm gonna say 64.77. And then I'm just going to put my end point right here where they intersect. Now I can take my internal line or your ruler and we're just gonna draw a line here. And we're gonna go, let's just say 70 centimeters. I just want a long line here, okay? Now we can actually start drafting how our waist is gonna sit and where our actual center back seam is going to sit and find what that slope is. So again, we took 1 centimeter from the front waist on the side seam. We need to take the exact same amount from the waist on the side seam on the back leg. So I'm gonna say 1 centimeter I'm gonna split that, and now this is actually where my side seam is gonna start on the waist. And then we're adding 2 waist darts in the back. That dart intake, the total dart intake, is gonna be 3 centimeters split across 2 darts. So it's gonna be 2 centimeters for the big dart, 1 centimeter dart intake for the small dart. So I need to measure out half of my waistband girth or waistband circumference plus 3 centimeters, okay? So from that point that I've just created, for my measurements, it's 44.5 is half the waistband girth. So we're gonna go 44.5 plus 3, so it's gonna be 47.5. And we're gonna split that line. So you just need to measure that. Now I'm gonna get rid of this excess here just to make it less confusing. So let's get rid of that outer segment point. And now to find where our actual center back seam is gonna sit, we're going to measure the front waist. So for me, this is 22.5. Again, Clo3D makes this really easy because I can just click on that line segment. I don't need to actually go through and measure everything. Once you have that measured, we're gonna go from the end of this point to the left, 22.5 centimeters. And we can get rid of this line now. All right, and so our true center back waist point is that measurement that we just measured to the left. I'm gonna draw an internal line, or you're gonna use a ruler. We want it to pass through the point that we created here. That was the back trouser crotch width when we measured that to the left. We're gonna add a point that goes through here, and we're gonna connect it to our back inseam. And I'm gonna join these overlapping points. And I'm gonna remove this excess here. We're gonna join these overlapping points. And then this that we used as the guideline for the side seam, I'm just gonna convert this to a baseline because we don't really need to focus on that right now. I'm also gonna remove this extra point because again, we took away 1 centimeter from the front, so we're taking away 1 centimeter from the back. Now, to finish up this side seam, I'm going to use my internal line tool. Hotkey again is G on the keyboard. I'm gonna select right there at the end. Make sure it goes through the hip, and then click all the way down here at the knee. And then at the waist and the knee, I'm going to join those overlapping points. So what we've done so far is we've expanded our knee and our hem by 2 centimeters, and then we've used that to draft the side seam, the waist, the center back, and then the crotch curve along the center back. Now all we need to do is add some of the shaping here. So again, we're gonna add a curve point about 1/3 of the way down, and then I'm gonna pull this out so the bottom falls along that guideline. My actual curve point here does not need to fall along that guideline. Now to finish out the side seam here, about 1/3 of the way down, I'm gonna create another curve point, and I'm gonna shift this just a bit, like 1/2 centimeter. That might even be too much. Let's take a look here. Yeah, I like that. Notice how this junction here is not 180 degrees. If you shift this to 180 degrees, it's going to look wonky. Even this at 181, we're adding way too much curve here. So let's go back. Okay, perfect. For the inseam, I'm gonna go 1/3 of this segment length up, 1/3 of the segment length down from the crotch point, and I'm gonna start shifting that in as well. Let's go in about 1 centimeter. For this crotch curve, I'm not super concerned with the exact amount that I'm shifting it. I do want it below the center front crotch point, but I am going to edit this to make sure that everything matches up properly before anything is set in stone. Our back leg is almost complete. We have the structured shape. We just need to add the darts. To add the darts, we're going to split our waist up in half. And then the segment towards the side seam, we're going to split that up in half. So that's going to be in quarters, technically. And then we're going to draw a perpendicular line down from that waist. I'm going to go down 10 centimeters for the large dart. And then I'm going to shorten the small dart by 2 centimeters. So that's going to go down 8 centimeters. And I'm just using the perpendicular internal line that we've used before to get this done quickly. So we have 3 centimeters total dart intake. For the large dart, we're using 2 centimeters. That means I need to measure out 1 centimeter from each midpoint of the dart. And then from the smaller dart, I'm going to go 1/2 centimeter. Now, take your ruler, or in Clo3D terms, take your internal line, click G, create your first segment point where you measured out, measure down to the apex of the dart, and then finish it on the other side. And we're going to do this for both darts. All right, so now we're done, but not quite. We need to finish some things up. We're going to true the seams. We're going to blend everything to create smooth curves around the crotch points here. So when the inseams meet up, we want a smooth transition between the front and back crotch. We're also going to do the same thing with the side seam. So what I'm going to do is, again, take my trace tool here, and I'm going to select every single outer part of the pattern. I'm going to ignore all of these internal lines here. And because you can select baselines with the trace tool, it does get a little bit messy. Make sure at the hem there's a lot of different points because we're, again, transferred over from the front. So click every single little point. If you go to trace as a pattern and you don't have everything selected, it'll either give you an error message or it'll only transfer a small amount. So again, doing it again here, make sure I get everything. You do not need to click the internal lines on the inside of the pattern, like the crease line, things like that. That'll automatically get transferred over for you. And I want my darts to be open in Clo3D. So I'm gonna just click around the internal dart legs there to get rid of that excess because our dart shaping is not done. We're just gonna trace that as a pattern. And now I'm going to take this, the master pattern, what we used to draft both of those. I'm going to move it out of the way and I'm going to archive it. Now I'm going to clean up the back pattern and then we'll start working on truing everything, blending, smoothing the curves in just a bit. Okay, so we've got our cleaned up pattern. Now you'll notice I have a hip line on the front. I don't have a hip line on the back because this is not our back hip. Actually, the back hip we measure from the hip line, from the hip segment here, so that specific segment point, it needs to intersect the center back seam perpendicularly. So this needs to be perpendicular at the end point. In Clo3D, there's no tool that's going to easily do this. You can use an L-square or ruler to determine this via manual pattern drafting. But here's a little hack for you in Clo3D. We're going to select the Edit Texture tool. When we select that, we can right-click on our pattern, and we're going to align the grain line parallel to our selected line. And we're going to select the center back seam, okay? Once we've done that, I'm clicking A to get to my pattern selection tool, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say rotate and reset along the grain line direction. Now Clo3D works off of a Cartesian grid, meaning there's a fixed X and Y axis. So I can go from here with my grain line tool, hold shift so it's completely horizontal, and then create an internal line, and then extend and trim. I'm going to add a little point here as well. Now to fix the grain line, I'm going back to my edit texture. I'm going to align grain parallel to selected, and I'm going to click on the crease line, which is the grain line of the pattern. Same thing, right click, rotate, and reset along grain line. Now, here we go. We have the back hip. Super easy, but something that actually took me a while to figure out. Kind of embarrassing to say, but it is what it is. We need to double check our hip before we do anything to make sure this is accurate. Now we want this to be 1/4 of our total hip girth or hip circumference plus 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters. So if I look at my measurements, the hip girth is 25.5 when you divide it by 4. So I have 27.5, so I'm right within that range. Perfect. What we need to do next is I want to make sure that my crotch curves have a smooth transition. To do this, I need to create a duplicate pattern piece, one that will match up with the front curve here. When you create a duplicate pattern piece in Clo 3D, you're going to see a blue outline around it. That means that it's linked. So when I apply a change to this pattern piece, it's also going to apply it to this one. If you're using paper, you can simply flip the paper over. In order to test this, obviously this is not going to match up perfectly, and rotating it just isn't going to get the job done. So I'm going to select the inseam of my right pattern piece, or my back leg, and I'm going to select the inseam of my front leg. I'm going to right click. I held shift so that way I can select both of them. I'm going to right click and go to match up and match it up to start. So at the top of this seam line, these are going to match up. And this isn't a very smooth curve. So what I'm going to do is go in here and oops. Let me get rid of this crotch line because I really don't need that as a reference in the back. What I'm going to do is shift this up just a bit, and then I'm going to smooth this out ever so slightly. Good. That's a much better curve. I could even drag this up just a little bit. I'll take that. I like that. That's a better curve. Perfect. And then I can right click on this pattern and say reset along grain line to get it back to normal. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to true up the waist seam. So I need to add a little bit of curvature to these darts, because if you sew these together in real life, you're going to get a weird, janky curve on the waist, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. What I like to do is, again, go to my edit texture, align grain line parallel to the center back seam, and then I'm going to rotate it along that axis. Now I know my center back seam is perfectly straight up and down. So what I'm going to do is create an internal line and then hold shift to make sure that I intersect that. That line is going to be perfectly perpendicular. What I need to do next is click on my internal lines, hold shift and click both of those. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say cut. All right, so now I've separated my pattern piece into 3 pattern pieces. What I'm doing in Clo 3D is kind of like a mock slash and spread. So I'm not getting rid of the darts, I'm just moving that opening to the center back seam basically. What I need to do to get a fully connected waistline is put these pattern edges together. So I'm going to select one pattern edge and I'm going to select the other one. They should be the exact same length because we haven't changed that at all. I'm going to right click and say merge. And then the same thing on the other side, I'm holding shift on both of them, left clicking both of them, and then right clicking merge. And now you can see, if we just sewed the darts as is, while it might work in Clo 3D, you're gonna get a jagged waistline, which we don't want when you're actually wearing trousers. So we need to fix this here. But I also want a smooth transition on the waist once our patterns meet at the top on the side seam here. Do this. I like to use an internal line. I don't like to just convert these segment points here into curve points. But if you're going to work with an internal line, you need to add the internal line before you match any patterns up. Otherwise, a lot of times it'll read as the front or the other pattern piece as opposed to the one you're working on. So I'm going to take my internal line, I'm going to select the side seam point and the center back point, and I'm just going to leave a straight line there. Now I'm going to grab the segment on the side seam that leads up to the waist here, and I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to select the same one on the front, and I'm going to do the same thing, match up and to start. And now we can see what it would look like when we match it up to the front leg. What I'm going to do now is just create a segment point here. Select a curve point here with V, create one, and I'm just gonna drag it down. And I want a smooth transition between the front and the back. Now you'll notice I'm coming to my center back seam at a different angle. That's okay for now. I'm gonna fix this. I found that Mueller & Son, they typically have the center back seam a little bit higher than I want. Granted, you do want your center back seam to be higher than the waist seam, but we're gonna leave this for now. Okay, so I'm gonna click Z to get my edit pattern segment tool here. And then I'm gonna hold shift and I'm gonna click on the actual pattern outline that I had from before. And then I'm gonna, with all that selected, I'm gonna right click and say replace as the pattern outline. If I go over here, I'm just shy of 90 degrees. I do want pretty good 90-degree angle at the center back. So I could technically pull this down just a little bit because I do want this a little bit lower. We'll say 20 mil, 0.2 centimeters. That's pretty good. So I like this curve. I like where this is sitting. These extra lines is because it creates a clone when you do that. Replace this pattern outline. So I'm going to delete the reference line to get rid of that. And now what I want to do is click my split line tool, which is X on the keyboard. I'm going to right click. I want a uniform split in half. And I'm going to uniform split in half towards the side seam again. The same thing we did when we actually drafted the darts. Now I'm going to click G and I'm going to connect those points. And then just like we did before, I'm going to select both of the internal lines. I'm going to right click and I'm going to cut and sew this time so it automatically sews the dart legs together. And then I'm going to click the bottom segments and I'm going to merge them. If you're doing this with paper and pencil, you don't have to go through this hassle. You can simply fold the paper and then trace over it, and then it's gonna give you that perfect dart. But I love that. This is actually perfect. See how we have the subtle curves along the waist? That's exactly what we want. I'm gonna extend this line all the way up to the top, and I'm gonna remove these base lines. All right, so let's match these up. And boom, that's a very nice transition. I like that. We're gonna have a very nice transition at the bottom as well because they're all meeting at a 90-degree angle at the hem. So everything is gonna be perfect there. I'm gonna go over to the seam allowance tool. It looks like this here. And I'm just gonna add the default seam allowance. Notice how the actual pattern looks a little bit janky. But when we add seam allowance, it smooths that out to the point where you wouldn't even notice it as you're sewing. So you don't need to hit 180 degrees. That's one of my pet peeves. It's one of the things that I struggled with when I started out with Clo3D. I was trying to get everything perfect. But again, remember back to when you're actually manually drafting, you're just using your eyeballs to smooth the curves. You're not getting a specific degree amount, so you don't need to worry about that too much. If your darts look like this, when you add seam allowance, that's because Clo3D is really awesome. If you select the apex, you can see we want to turn our dart towards the center back seam, so I'm gonna do dart cap 1, and I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm in the property editor, by the way. The property editor is kind of like the property editor in Photoshop or Illustrator if you come from that world, and the object browser is kind of like the layers panel. All right, and then let's duplicate here. And then we're gonna add sewing. Now, when you add sewing, you can use the segment sewing tool, which is going to stop in segments here. You can click M and do free sewing where you can draw it. But to make sure that we have everything lined up properly, I don't want to just go from here and go all the way down. Rather, I want my hips to meet where they're supposed to, and it's not going to be this exact same line length. That's okay. I don't want anything more than a half a centimeter. That's going to be a little bit too much, but this is all fine when you go to actually sew the garment together. When I get down here to the knee, I'm gonna use my free sewing tool because I don't need to break up these bottom segments here. Those can all be sewn together as one. And so you just gotta remember to sew the right pattern pieces together. So I like to have mine arranged like this to make it easier to see as I'm going along here. So I really like everything here. I'm gonna remove that segment point. And once you've done that, we can put it on our avatar. What I like to do is I like to start by strengthening the patterns because it gets a little bit weird when you put it on the avatar. We're gonna select a pattern piece, and I like to use the arrangement points just to get a baseline of where everything is gonna go. So you click on your pattern in the 2D window, and then you click on an arrangement point, and it's gonna start to align things. Now I'm gonna press spacebar and I'm gonna simulate. And then I'm clipping here at the foot. It's coming down a little too far. So I'm gonna stop my simulation. I'm gonna click A for my pattern selector. I'm gonna drag over everything. And then I'm gonna click the green arrow, shift it up just a little bit, maybe shift it towards the front a tad. And I'm gonna simulate again. And now it's coming out from the feet. I'm gonna pull it down because it's not quite sitting exactly where I want it to sit. Beautiful. And then we can unstrengthen because we want to get a more accurate look here. I'm using muslin to test it out. I recommend using a muslin fabric as opposed to the default fabric for simulation, or use whatever fabric you're planning to actually make with the garment, because the default fabric for simulation is like a jersey knit. It has so much give, so it's not necessarily going to be super accurate to maybe a canvas or twill or something like that. And then we can also go down here, we can check the stress, strain, and fit. Everything looks good. All right, y'all, so we have just drafted our first basic block. This is a slim trouser block that we can use to create whatever we want. I hope y'all found this useful. If you want to create your own sewing patterns, your own clothing line, this is going to be the foundation for that. I hope y'all take this and run with it. If you'd like to take this and design with me, I'll see y'all on Patreon. We're gonna be creating our own patterns and also learning from the pros. We're gonna take designer garments, reference images, and we're gonna use that to recreate these garments so we can learn, create beautiful garments that you can make in your living room. We are gonna take Milan to your living room. Once again, my name is Alexander. If you came here from Instagram, thank you, and I hope you subscribe to my YouTube channel for more in-depth tutorials.